Might speed it up and slow it down a few times. We'll see. And pause it. Alright. Hey guys, this is MCanning here coming at you with another guide. This time it is PvT, and we're going to jump right into a game here. This guide will not be built around a build order here, even though we will show off this build order we have and the build we do. This guide is mostly going to be about scouting and what we scout for, and the important things in PvT that I'm always looking for every single game we play. So every single game I open the same exact way. We always open, you'll see me just doing my pregame hotkeys here, but we always open 15 gate, 17 assimilator, 19 nexus, every single game we play. Now sometimes Terrans will be on double gas cheesing you, and that's the very rare minority, and I will probably change my build up a little bit, but this is the build I'm going to be doing pretty much every single game. Something very important I want to talk about right as we start in. Always scout in PvP. Every single map is a 2-player map, so you know your scouting time is going to be the same pretty much no matter what. Like on a 4-player map it's a little different because you can scout late. All the maps in the map pool are 2-player maps. So every time you play PvP, you should be scouting on 15 supply or 17 supply. Reason being, if you scout on 19 supply, which is after you placed on your nexus, if you scout after this nexus, your probe gets here at 2 minutes, Reaper pops out at 2 minutes, okay? So you do not want to be at their base at 2 minutes because like you get there and then your probe instantly dies and it's just useless, right? It's just absolutely useless. So that's something to think about. Also, the Marine comes out about 147, 148 from the barracks. So a lot of times, a lot of the time, what I will do is I will sit here and wait to see if 180, if by 147, 148, if the Marine is not out, I will know it's a Reaper. Otherwise, I'm not exactly sure. So another thing, jumping into it right here, we're gonna go to his base, and this is a small thing as well, but we go to his base and we're scouting. We're going to notice this is just my vision from in the game. We're going to see me look at the probe. I'm going to click on his gas geyser. And we're going to see how much gas he has mined. Now, it can tell us two things. He can either go barracks first into gas, or he goes gas first into barracks. And I've played so much, I actually know, but when I get to his base, his timing, whether that's gas or barracks. But you'll see right, you're going to see, I'm going to click on the gas geyser, right? And I see 1908, which is telling us that he went gas first. So especially, I scouted here on 15 after my first gate day. You can scout after your gas. If you scout after your gas, you'd be a little bit lower, maybe 80 or something. So what this tells us something right off the bat, is that he went gas into barracks, which actually right now is not as crazy as it used to be. But there is a lot of different Terran builds you have to look out for when you scout this, because there are some proxy factory plays you face with this, where they'll open Marine first, and they'll go proxy factory, or they'll go factory in their own base. So when you see a build like this, you really want to see if it's a Marine or a Reaper. So a lot of the builds in the early game that you're thinking about really kind of rely on this: is it a Marine, is it a Reaper, how much gas do they mine? Those three things I think about every single game I play PvT. So like I scout 1900 gas here, and I think to myself, I scout for the other gas as well. So now I'm thinking, is it going to be a Reaper? Is it going to be a Marine? And I will tell you this, right now, in general, actually, this build, even if they go gas into barracks, is actually still really common to just be your standard Widow Mine drop. This build used to be done where it would go barracks and then gas, and it would just be a Widow Mine drop down the road. But so it has kind of come back into gas first, into Widow Mine drop. But there's a lot of different variations Terran players will do. So, you know, you kind of got to prepare for that. But in general, when you're playing the game, you really want to more or less be learning from your own meta, right? So you know your opponents the best, you know what you face the most. So at the end of the day, like, if your opponents are only doing, always doing Widow Mine drop, always doing tank push, if I'm telling you there could be all these different builds, but you're only facing a tank push, prepare for the tank push. Don't prepare for what I'm placing. So what I'm doing here is I'm scouting the back, my mineral fields here with this probe, and scouting over here, because I'm not sure if it is a proxy factory. My PvT proxy scouting has been not as great lately, and I have a little bit harder time reading some of the builds right now, because there are kind of a lot of different Terran variations popping up. Decent amount of factories behind the mineral field and stuff like that, so it's something I was scouting for, knowing he went gas first here. In general, when it's a Reaper opener, when they open Reaper, I would say most of the time I faced a Widow Mine drop down the road. Now, not always, of course, but when it's a Reaper opener, I would say like 75%, 80% of my games was always is always a Widowmine follow-up down the road. So something I kind of am already thinking about. Okay, I see the Reaper, probably a Widowmine, because the reason I think that is because the reason it's more likely is because he spent 50 gas on that Reaper. That's why this early game is important. So if he's at 1900 and he goes Marine, he's got 100 gas he hasn't used. So it's 100% a factory. So you know, like, his build, you know it can't be 3 racks because he's mined 100 gas and he's opened with a Marine. So that's something you got to be thinking about. Now, when he opens, if he's at 1950 gas when you go in here and scout, or 1948 or 1960, around that 50 gas mark, you can feel comfortable. It could be a 3 racks, could still be a factory follow-up, but it's not really gonna be your fast tank plays, your fast aggression builds, because he just won't have the gas for it. He's mined 50 gas, he's spent 50 gas on a Reaper. You can kind of rule a lot of those proxy factory builds out. So when you see a Marine, you know, okay, they haven't spent that gas. They haven't spent that gas on a Reaper. There's a lot of other builds that are open to them because they haven't used that gas. So that's kind of why that early game scout is really, really important. So when I see a Reaper, I say to myself, well, they spend 50 gas on this. A lot of the times it just becomes a Widowmine drop. Now, it might not come a Widowmine drop for you. Maybe you face 3 racks. Maybe you face tank push. You know, form the meta off of what you scout, what you face. This is what I face. Okay? And I will touch on using your first overcharge here to kill a Reaper. I did it here, right? We killed the Reaper. I just want to touch on this real quick. In general, only if you're sure you're going to kill. What I love to do in my PvTs is have my Mothership Core kind of hiding here, and then if the Reaper comes close, you can just overcharge. It's always worth to kill, in my opinion, the first Reaper. But the issue with overcharging your first Reaper here is, as you'll see down the road, the difference between overcharging and not is when the Widowmine drop hits. If you don't overcharge the Reaper, you have 2 overcharges, but if you use your overcharge on the Reaper, you only have 1 overcharge when the Widowmine drop hits. So it's something to think about, a little give-take. Also, every single game, this is how I open versus Terran. I open Adept, Warp Gate, and Mothership Port. Every single game, we do this build. And this is my most common PvT build. Now, I'll go into the build a little bit later. So this is something I don't usually do here, is go across the map and scout with my Mothership Core and my Adept. Every time I kill the Reaper, I'll push across the map, but if I don't kill the Reaper, my Adept will be on patrol here, my Mothership Core will be in my main, you know, whether she's guarding over here or just kind of near your pylons, is something very, very important. And I'll just be scouting around my Adept. If I don't kill the Reaper, then you just play safe, you kind of go off what you know. Not as important here, what's happening here, because once he opens Reaper, we kind of know, and we see these Marines, we're pretty sure it's a Widowmine drop. I'm already kind of preparing for it. I mean, pretty much every game I play, I will always prepare for the Widowmine drop just because I face it in so many of my games. And just because I face it, guys, I'll keep saying this, but like, just because I face it doesn't mean you face it. But it's something that when you face something so much, you start preparing for it. Now, I don't always face the Widowmine drop. Sometimes people will cut and go fast tank push against me, and then I've made 2 observers and things get sticky. But the majority of the games I face this Widowmine drop, so a lot of the times I prepare for it whether it's coming or not. Okay, and I see the Reaper, I'm kind of ready for it. And I will talk about my build order here. I think this is the best build order right now in PvT, in my opinion. I'm not sure how many super pros are using it right now, but I know some pros use it, and I know it's just a really, really strong and solid build for a lot of you guys at home. I'll speed this up a little bit here, but basically the general build of this is a Colossus-oriented build after 2 observers, okay? I do want to talk about this for the timing. You can see the Widowmine drop is coming initially, you know, the time here. I'm starting to come back because I know the Widowmine drop is coming. I'll talk about my build order in a second. I'll talk about the Widowmine drop. So the way I like to handle the Widowmine drop is, you can see my Robo Bay, my gas, you know, do I make a Colossus? I always get 2 observers every single game I play versus Terran. And that is mostly because, in general, you know, I see a lot of people say, you know, how do I deal with drops? How do I deal with all this stuff? A lot of it stems off of vision. And some of it, you know, some is game sense, some knowledge, but a lot of the times you lose to drops or lose to things, it's because your lack of vision. So 2 early game observers are so good because they give you value for such a long time. So I'll always make 1 observer and hotkey it in case I need it to come back to my main. And then you can see, like, I have my vision here. So if I see what's coming over here, I can kind of cheat and play over here with most of my units because I can see nothing's coming to my main. I will bring my Mothership Core here. You can see the pylon placement always protecting my mineral field. I got pylons protecting my mineral field. And this is just me. Like, I haven't scouted him, right? I haven't seen that this Widowmine is coming, but I just know the timings. I know that this is the timing this happens. You know, 440, 450, 5 minutes is when the Widow Mine drop initially happens. Once these first two observers come out, the Widow Mine drop can be hitting you. Okay, so I do start up a Colossus here, and we do see the Widow Mine drop coming over there, right? And we, of course, shut it down. I wasn't sure if I was going to get a shot off, so I pulled. But I will talk about this build just briefly, because I don't really want this to be a build order guide. I'm just going to speed up a little bit here. Because I didn't want this to be a build order guide, but this is the build order I think is really good in PvT, and it gives you a lot of variation of different types of things you can do with this build. So this build is 1 gate, and then Robo, and then 2 more gates. And I went for a faster third than I normally do. Usually I get these gateways before I take the third, and I would recommend you guys getting the gateways before a third, especially in the lower leagues where you want to play a little safer, maybe macro up on 2 bases. But it's it's gate, Robo, 2 gates, Robo Bay, double gas at the same time. When you make that Robo Bay, double gas goes down at that exact time. And then a little bit later, you'll start floating some minnows. Like about probably halfway through the Robo Bay, you go double forge, and then eventually you go 2 more gateways. And I do this all on 2 bases, and I like to get out 2 Colossus, okay? And I get out 2 Colossus to hold off. I just held. I'll show you something here as well, but I get 2 Colossus and then I transition into Disruptors. You can do so many things with this. You can open 1 Colossus and insta go into Disruptors. You can open 1 Colossus, transition into something else. You can go 3, 4, 5, 6 Colossus and try to go old Heart of the Swarm style with heavy Colossus. Still somewhat viable. The best type of plays I think are when you go 1, 2, 3 Colossus and transition to Disruptors or Storm. You can easily still go Colossus Storm like you did in Heart of the Swarm. It's still a very good build. You don't have to use Disruptors if you don't want to. My build that I like to do, I like to go 2 Colossus into Disruptors. But you can do any variation you want with this, and it gives you the good double forge upgrades. I really like this build. I really recommend this build right now. So you'll see just a little game sense here that happens when I'm playing PvT, especially at this level. Now, you guys might not see this, but I see a Liberator coming into Siege here, and in my brain, you know, the timing of this Liberator, I already stopped the Widow Mine drop. I know that this can't just be a naked Liberator here. So I'm already preparing in my main because I say to myself, it doesn't make sense to just siege up a Liberator here. So you'll see me in my game sense, I'm preparing in my main as well for a drop. I say, this doesn't make sense. There has to be like a Liberator here. And there it is. You know, sure enough, here comes the drop. Because when we kill the Liberator, you know, at this level, people wouldn't just give you a Liberator like that. It's almost like they're setting up for double prong harass, and that's exactly what happened here. Pull some units back, and, you know, we just deflect everything here. We have a clean opener where he gets nothing done in that early game. We're on a third, we have Colossus, and life is good. Alright, so this game is kind of going to continue. We're just going to put double pumper upgrades. But now I'm going to talk a little bit more about, you know, in-depth knowledge while I'm playing. The build orders, I think, are really whatever. You can use so many different build orders and win so many different games. I think the knowledge while you're playing is more important. So we're going to talk a lot about build orders while this game is going on. I'll talk about dealing with drops in general. Dealing with drops from different angles, how to split your armies. A lot of questions out there, you know, I see so many people always say, pretty much everyone will always talk about how they always get wrecked by Doom drops, or they don't see a drop and they die to it. And really, a lot of the times you die to Doom drops, in my opinion, the way most players die to Doom drops is just from the... I'll pause this. Is mostly from not lack of vision. It's just like anything in the game of StarCraft, and the majority of players I watch of replays, like in the lower leagues, is you're just not scouting enough. You don't have enough vision. Like, you should feel nervous and anxious when you don't have vision. You don't see your opponent on the map. You don't know where they are. You don't know their composition, because that is when you lose games. Like, if the first time you see a Doom drop is when it's in your base, or the first time you see a Doom drop, or any attack, tank push, heavy Liberator siege, is when it's at your base, you're going to lose that game a lot of time. Any composition, right? Any, you know, Broodlords, Aldras, any composition in the game. Scouting is so underrated. People think about build orders, people think about all these different compositions, but really the thing that made me climb was literally just scouting and game knowledge off of my scouting. So you'll see from my vision alone, right, we got an observer here to see when he pushes out, still have our observer here, always controlling our watchtower. I like to have both watchtowers. A lot of times I'll also be sending units up here, you know, just to try to make sure I certainly know where my opponent is at all times, because vision is literally king in this game. It is so important. I will also talk about for a second your opponent's build in scouting. Now, I could have this observer in his base, right? I could have it up here, right now I'd say the most common thing I face are some tank pushes, which are pretty hard to handle. But this is the biggest tell. Okay, right here. He's doing it right here. The biggest tell you're playing when you're playing. I should have probably had my production tab on, but the biggest tell when you're playing Terran is this: is every single game they should be on three barracks, starport, and a factory. Your biggest decision for the Terran player is, are they going for 2 more barracks or a 3rd CC? And if they go for 2 more barracks before a 3 CC, so if they go 5 barracks before they're on a 3rd CC, it's an all-in. Okay, you don't really think of it as an all-in because it's 2 bays, they have a bunch of bio, but it's an all-in. You just have to kind of hold this attack and you win because they're so committed. They're going to be mining out of their main. It is an all-in. So whenever I scout a Terran that doesn't have a 3rd CC and they go for these 2 racks, this is your big indicator. If you're scouting, if you're sending hallucinations into their base, whatever, if you don't scout a 3rd CC and you scout these 2 barracks instead of a 3rd CC, you say, why is he's making 2 more barracks instead of a 3rd CC? Prepare for an attack or a couple of attacks coming at you, because that is aggression. That is your sign. That's saying, okay, this guy's not thinking about playing macro. He's thinking about putting a lot of pressure on me in the next minute, 2, 3 minutes coming up, because that's your big sign. Now, if he goes for a 3rd CC, it kind of becomes more of a standard macro game. This guy also goes double starport, something I don't really see. But your biggest indicator, imagine the starport's not here. I almost never see double starport like this. But the 2 extra barracks instead of the 3rd CC, that's your tell in the mid game to say, is he going very heavy aggression, or is he actually just gonna, play macro, maybe go for a couple drops here and there. So we'll go back to my vision, and something I recommend on a lot of these maps is to start doing this. Once you get to about 3 bases, your mothership core should also never be in your main army. It should always be in your main base defending. In a lot of these maps, I would create a bit of a wall. I'm kind of broke right now, and I'm a bit oversupplied, so I don't really want a vest. But in general, you want to create a lot of pylons in your, like a little, kind of like an interconnected thing too, where they're supporting each other, so you can double overcharge. And if they come here and kill one, you won't be super exposed. I'm pretty sure I'll come and fortify this a little bit even more, because you really, really want to have a wall with the mothership core here. It really makes handling doom drops a lot easier, especially when you don't scout it. In a lot of these maps, it can be hard to scout the doom drop. That is another reason I love this Colossus build, because you can put 1 Colossus in your main with some adepts, with some stalkers, and literally deflect a lot of drops that come at you, especially with your overcharge. And then you just kind of get over here and camp with disruptors. It's really, really good. So handling that is very, very important. Now, we are not facing a tank push this game, but I will tell you, I don't believe we're facing a tank push. No, we're not facing a tank push this game. So he's going for a ton of Vikings because we have Colossus. But again, we can't actually see that. But this is more of a, it doesn't really matter what happens in the game. We're talking about knowledge and game sense. So I want to just touch briefly, because he's not on a tank push. But if he was on a tank push, I want to tell you guys how to beat a tank push. And, no 2 games are alike, right? Some Terrans will get a lot more tanks. Some Terrans will get, go up to 4, 5, 6 tanks. Some Terrans will get 2 tanks, some Liberators. The best way to deal with a lot of these tank pushes are adepts, actually, believe it or not, is being patient. Don't just funneling in there. Don't just A-moving. Every time you try to take a tank fight on, especially when they're already sieged up, like let's say you sieged here or something, it depends on your composition, but almost always, I would just say better off just say go with always. You want to be warping in, some stalkers, some adepts. You obviously don't want like pure adept or pure stalker, but shading on top of their army when they're on tanks. Adepts and patience are the best way to beat tank pushes, because the adept friendly fire, they can get on top of the army, they can really distract. You're not all clumped up. The tanks might be shooting down low. You can get some damage with the Colossus, the stalkers, maybe disruptors, immortals, whatever you have. Adept shading, half your adepts, all your adepts, just shading them into the army. I know it can be hard to split them up, but anywhere, splitting them onto the tanks. Some onto the tanks, some onto the Marines is probably the best. But just throwing the adepts, waiting, getting a strong enough army, and then just attacking it all at once with the adepts is really the best way to deal with those tank pushes. It can definitely be tough, but it is one of the best ways to deal with a tank push.
I have met the enemy.
So, once again though, like, the most important thing in PvP is, PvT, has to be scouting, because it's not as much like Zerg where it's like, oh, he's going to go for a big muta switch, although you do have to worry about Liberators. I'll talk more about some Liberator compositions, some Phoenix Adept compositions at the end of this game, but you're kind of just thinking about what he could have, what he's doing. Is he going for these racks, right? We see he doesn't have a third because he went for these racks. He's going for super aggression. And we didn't actually scout this game, right? But if we did, we would have known that he was going for this more or less all-in style, right? I have so many more workers than him. And I actually remember this game. I almost lose this game here. But it doesn't really matter to me where this game goes from here. I mean, because it's like these builds are so good all the time, and it's really scouting and knowledge. I actually didn't have a ton of great scouting, but you can see my map vision now, okay? He cleaned up the middle of the map, but you can see I'm on a lot of his bases. I made sure, like, I've scouted all the bases around the map. I've been on the watchtowers. He just kicked me off this watchtower. Literally, that's how I know he's coming. That's why I'm, like, repositioning here, right? Because I thought the Vikings were coming. So, we almost lose this fight until a disruptor saves us. But he's so all in with this. And our upgrades, you know, we're going for 2-2, and he's on 0-1. But once again, this fight could go so many different ways, I feel like. Once you get past 7, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, I mean, this is still that timing in 2-base, but the games can go anybody's way, right? There's a reason I don't win every single PvT I play. I don't win every single PvT I play, because once you get past that early macro game, you know, like, see this wall I have? Very, very important, I feel. You keep your mothership port. I'm bringing my mothership port to try to join. She already was overcharging. But, you know, being fortified here, trying to scout to make sure he's not dropping you from over here, having something, you should really have units like all covering your bases, and you'll never lose to doom drops again. But if you start using zealots as observers, put a zealot here, put a zealot here, put a zealot here, you know, you should always be like, man, I don't have the side of my base covered. I need to have extra vision here. Very, very important. So, you know, we ended up cleaning up and winning this game barely. But it's just a close game of StarCraft. And we could have lost, we could have won, we ended up getting the better of this engagement barely. But this is just what StarCraft's all about. You know, we had a strong opener, got us in the lead. We didn't take a lot of damage to his Liberator, his Widowmine drop, his second Widowmine drop. So we transitioned pretty well, and then we held off his all-in. And I didn't even realize, this was me holding off an unscouted all-in, right? Because I really didn't realize he was actually all-inning me. This was pretty bad scouting on my part. But my point still stands about, you know, knowledge. And I think especially at this level, you know, where I'm at as a player, it's probably not the best to say, but, like, scouting once you get to a certain level is one of those things where I know so much about what builds are from just seeing a few things, right? If I see his composition, if I see some of these timings, I can understand that maybe this isn't all in. This is a Widowmine drop. This is a tank push. This is a 2-base all in. Just from the units he has, just from this composition, I can pick that up, right? Without scouting. I've played so many games that my game sense is like that. But, you know, for 99.99% of you guys out there, you're not going to know. You need to be scouting. Get your observers. Get sentries to use hallucinated phoenixes to scout. You know, try to use zealots for scouting. It's so important. I'm always, like, look at, I got these zealots across the map. I had a zealot over here. Not anymore. I probably used I think I used my cycler army hockey. That's why everyone's coming back right now, because if I was losing the fight. But it's so important to have your zealots everywhere, and then eventually we go and clean them up. But I will talk about a few of the other things that are really important in PvT that were not in this game. You know, we win the fight here. It is what it is. So I will talk about just a few more things in the matchup, and then I'll kind of give a too long don't watch of my most important things in StarCraft PvT right now. Okay, so I got some questions that were chosen by the chat here that I will talk about. Someone asked how to close out late game PvT. He says once he gets past 10 minutes, he has a really hard time, and maybe think of what would be your optimal composition. And to that, I don't want to have super long answers because I know this has been a pretty long video as is. But when I think about closing out late game PvT, once again, you know, you need to have good vision. Doom drops are even more popular. Most popular thing I face is heavy Tempest, or heavy Liberator. So transitioning to Tempest is a good part of your late game. It really just depends on what style and composition you'd like to use, right? I like to use Disruptors, Blank Stalkers. I can get a lot done with that. Maybe if you want to go Colossus, Storm, that's something you got to think about. But I would say if you're having a hard time closing out, you know, there's so many different reasons you can have a hard time closing a game off. It can be lack of map vision, lack of game sense, not realizing you want to fight and can go kill them, and you sit back and you don't macro well enough. It's kind of a vague question, but I would say, you know, always keeping your good vision up so you can take good engagements, knowing when to fight, transitioning to Tempest late game when they have Mass Liberator, and just playing more late games. I think it's so, the more late game you play, the more comfortable you'll feel with it. It's just the way it is. Like, it's hard to know how to get better at late game until you play more and more and more and more late game. So it's kind of a vague question. So I would say, Tempest, find your composition that you like is also something I would say. Maybe you want to go charge a lot Immortal. Go for some Storm play, go for Disruptors. In my opinion, any composition can work. Phoenix Adept, Colossus, Disruptors. I wouldn't open Storm. I don't think that's a good part of the meta right now. Transitioning to Storm after Colossus is a million times better than just going Storm. I wouldn't open Storm in PvT, but I would definitely go Colossus into Storm. You could even go Colossus into Fast Storm. You cut tech a little bit. So find a composition you like, get comfortable with. I like Blinkstalker Disruptor. Maybe you love going Colossus and love going Storm, love going Disruptor. You know yourself better than you, and you know what your opponent's doing. Maybe nobody's going Mass Liberator. So try to see what your opponents are doing in the late game and counter them. How to engage tank pushes, how to engage those pushes. So I will talk about the tanks just one more time. If they have tanks here, shading in, going onto the tanks, going onto the Marines is how I beat most of my tank pushes, the Adept Shade, especially the earlier ones. If the game gets later, I probably won't be using big Adept Shades. I'll be trying to whittle away the bio and then eventually kill the tanks. But for most of these tank pushes, Adept Shading, maybe getting Immortal out, is so good. And just shading on top of the army and then trying to take the fight on top of the tanks. And in general, again, sometimes you might die to a tank push even if you shade the Adepts in. I will say, again, scouting. My biggest takeaway here is scouting is always important. And if the first time they're doing a tank all-in is when the tanks are sieged up here and they got a medvac here and they're showing away at your probes, it's going to be hard to hold no matter what you do. I don't care if you're the best player in the world. If there is some cheese that is hitting you and you're not ready for it, you haven't scouted it until it's finally hitting you, it's always going to be hard to hold. So try to scout, try to get vision, try to see what they're doing at all times, and trying to figure out your opponent. And a lot of it comes from game sense and knowledge. And you might not have this game sense right away, but you play more games, you practice, and you start to understand, okay, when they open Widowmine drops, like he's facing this tank push follow-up. So I guess, you face it 5, 10, 20. If by the 30th game you realize the tank push follow-up, you're in a good spot because you've learned something, you've adapted, you've understood things, and you've gotten better. Another question we have here is, what composition do you want to choose? Do you go when to choose Colossus, when to choose Disruptor? I think it's a personal preference. You can open Disruptor early if you want. You can open Colossus early if you want. Personally, I've been enjoying opening 2 Colossus and then transitioning into Disruptor. I think you can go 2, 3, 4, 5 Colossus. You can go Colossus Storm. You can go Colossus Disruptor. You can really change it up. I think a lot of compositions work. I think Phoenix Adept works. Anything really. We have a question of how to pressure, when to pressure. Not my strongest suit because a lot of the times I am always just playing defensively, deflecting that Widowmine drop, getting a good army, and taking good fights. That's kind of how I win my PvTs. I deflect early aggression to get myself a lead, take it third, get good upgrades, and then win the fights. I know how to take good fights, so I am able to. I feel more comfortable as the game goes on. That might not be you. Maybe you want to go for those early game fights, right? So know yourself. Know yourself. But I would say, knowing when to pressure depends what you're wanting to do. Are you trying to do a little bit of harass? Are you all-inning? I would say either way you go on it, don't go half and half. If you're going for an all-in, commit to an all-in. Don't say, well, if this doesn't work, I'm going to go for a third. If you're going for an all-in, commit to an all-in. If you're going for pressure, maybe, only go 2 Adepts in your Warp Prism and go for a fast third and say, I'm going to have these 2 Adepts here, but I'm going really for an expansion. It's more or less just me trying to get some harass. So try not to overcommit to pressure and try not to undercommit to an all-in. If you're going to go for one thing or the other, go for it all the way, is what I'd say. And one thing I'll just touch upon is how to go Phoenix Adept. It's, in general, how to open Phoenix Adept versus Terran. This is very, very general, but it's the way that I do it, and I see a lot of pros do it, this is how it should be done. It goes Gateway. It's your standard 15 gate, gas, your standard 19 Nexus build, and then Chrono the Adept, get Warp Gate, skip your Mothership Core, go for your Stargate. It's going to be a lots of process, guys, but there are tons of builds out there. But the biggest things to know when you're going Phoenix Adept is you go Gate, Stargate. I mean, you already have a second base. Then you go for a third Nexus. Then you go 2 gateways. So it's Stargate, and then you're up to 3 gateways. And then you go Twilight Forge at the same time. And the exact time, once you get Twilight Forge, you go double gas. Those 4 buildings go together every single game you go Phoenix Adept. It should be Twilight Forge, gas, gas. Every single game you go Phoenix Adept, and that's after 3 gates after your Stargate. So it's 1 gate, Stargate, 2 more gates, Forge, Twilight, 2 gases, and then you ramp up. You go 4 or 5 more gates, so you have 9 total gateways. And then after you've made all your gateways, that is when you get your Robo Bay. So at the very, very end is when you get your Robo Bay when you're playing versus Terran. So it's pretty basic. It's gate, Stargate, 2 more gates, Twilight Forge, a bunch of gateways, and then at the very end Robo. So that's just the general thing to think about when you're doing this. So keeping your Oracle alive is obviously important. You know, maybe making cannons in your mineral line are important. But yeah, that's just your general Phoenix Adept build. So my final thoughts on this guide, guys, and tutorial. Hopefully I didn't digress too much. My biggest takeaways right now in PvT in general are obviously, once again, you know, try not to be so caught up in the build order and try to scout. Try to figure out what your opponent is doing. I know scouting is not really a good answer for many things, but scouting can literally carry you so many leagues above everything. Like, once you start scouting and start saying, oh, this is, you know, heavy Marauder play, or he's going for a big Doom drop, or he's doing a heavy Liberator play, or he's going Cloak Banshee, or he's going Tech. Once you start scouting and seeing the builds that your opponents are doing, then you can handle them. You know, how are you going to win games if you don't know what your opponent's doing, or if you don't see the opponent do a big Doom drop or a big tank push? If you don't see the builds coming, that's a big problem. So learning how to scout, trying to scout, knowing your timings. We'll just touch upon the early game one more time. Remember, when you first scout, you scout on 15 or 17, because 19 scout, you'll probably die to the first Reaper. You're looking to count the gas. If the gas is down at 1900, it was a gas first. And it could be, you know, fast factory play, could be fast tank play, could be proxy factory. If their gas is at 1950, then it's more likely to be, it's going to be a Reaper. So this guy goes gas first, but he still goes Reaper. And it kind of gives you, you know, think about what he opens with. Does he open with a Reaper? Does he open with a Marine? Because if you see that Reaper, you say, okay, he spent 50 gas on this Reaper. That's 50 less gas he has for a factory. Probably less likely he's going to be going for aggression. When I see a Reaper opener, personally, it's almost always a Widowmine drop follow-up. So it's just, you know, things to think about in your own game, your own meta. Different types of things you want to learn while you play. And, you know, just get after it. I think the best way to learn is to play games. There's no shortcut to getting good at PvT, getting to any matchup. You get in there and grind games. If you want to become the best, if you want to become better than where you are now, you have to play games. You just have to play games. You have to learn. You have to play, you have to learn. And that's, hopefully you picked up 1 or 2 things away from this video that will help you strive for your next goal. And maybe I'll see you on the ladder. But hopefully you guys learned something from this tutorial. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. I might make some follow-up tutorials as well on other matchup, definitely on other matchups, maybe even my Phoenix Adept build or some other PvT openers. But as for now, you know, try not to be so focused on the build order. Think about your scouting, try to see if they're going tanks, if you need to shade in adepts, you know, if you need to go for immortals, if you want to go disruptors, you want to go colossus. Scouting is king in this matchup, and that's kind of what I base all my games on, is, you know, where are my opponent? Are they going for this tank push? Are they going for this Widowmine drop? Are they just going for Spio Doom drop play? And I adjust accordingly. You know, if it's heavy bio play, I'll probably have a Colossus in my main base, because I'll say they could be going Doom drops. You know, if it's tanks, I probably wouldn't be expecting a Doom drop as much. So it's kind of things you try to think about while you're playing against your opponent and your composition. And yeah, it can be a lot to think about, but it really isn't that bad once you start playing more and more. And you start to learn what your opponents are doing. Your opponents might be doing something different, but they might be all doing the same thing. So that will be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and hope to see you guys next time.